Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Introduction. A man who changed our world. Have you ever used an iPhone? Or listened to music on an iPod? Maybe you've seen a Pixar movie like Toy Story. If you have, you know the work of Steve Jobs. He was a very special man. He didn't just invent things. He made them beautiful and easy to use. Steve's life was with lots of highs and lows. He started Apple in a garage, but then he was kicked out. Later, he came back and made Apple one of the biggest companies in the world. He had big ideas, a strong will, and he never stopped trying to make things better. This is the story of Steve Jobs, a man who changed how we live and work with technology, and left a big mark on our world. Chapter 1. A different kind of childhood. Steve Jobs' story begins in a special way, with two families. He was born on the 24th of February, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His birth parents were Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali. Abdul Fattah Jandali was from Syria. His family was rich and important there. He came to America to study at a university in Wisconsin. There, he met Joanne Schiebel. Joanne's family owned a farm and land in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Joanne and Abdul Fattah fell in love, but Joanne's father didn't want them to be together. When Joanne found out she was going to have a baby, she decided to give baby up for adoption. She wanted the baby to be raised by people who had gone to college. She traveled to San Francisco to have the baby, but things didn't go as planned. The couple who were going to adopt the baby changed their minds when they found out it was a boy. So, the baby, who would later be called Steve Jobs, was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul Jobs was a mechanic, and Clara Jobs was a bookkeeper. They lived in California. They were a kind, working-class couple. Clara was of Armenian descent, and Paul was from Wisconsin. They had met after World War II and quickly fell in love. They had wanted children, but were unable to have them. So, they decided to adopt. When Joanne Schiebel found out that her baby had been adopted by a couple who hadn't gone to college, she was upset. She didn't want to sign the adoption papers, but Paul and Clara promised to pay for Steve's college education. Joanne finally agreed. Steve knew from a young age that he was adopted. His parents were always honest with him about it. He remembered one day, when he was a child, telling a girl across the street that he was adopted. She asked if that meant his real parents didn't want him. This made Steve feel sad, and he ran home crying. His parents told him that they had chosen him especially. They made him feel loved and special. Steve grew up in Silicon Valley, a place that was becoming famous for technology. His father showed him how to fix things and work with his hands. Steve wasn't very interested in fixing cars, but he liked electronics. He learned about electronics from his father and from books. He also met a friend named Steve Wozniak, who also loved electronics. In his neighborhood, many of the fathers were engineers. They worked on things like radar and batteries. Steve was curious about these things. He asked questions and learned. He began to realize that he was smart, maybe even smarter than his parents. This made him feel different. Even though he was loved by his parents, he knew he was adopted. This, along with his intelligence, made him feel separate from the world. He was a child who was both abandoned and chosen, ordinary and special. This unique childhood helped shape him into the person he would become, a man who would change the world. Chapter 2. Blue Boxes and the Start of Apple. After high school, Steve had a friend named Steve Wozniak. Everyone called him Woz. Woz was a genius with electronics. He loved building things, especially computers. He was very good at it. Steve and Woz were very different people, but they became good friends because of their shared interests. One day, Wozniak read an interesting article in a magazine. It was about something called phone phreaking. Phone phreakers were people who found ways to make free long-distance phone calls. They used special devices to trick the phone system. These devices were called blue boxes. Wozniak was fascinated. He wanted to build his own blue box. He knew he could do it. He had the skills and the knowledge. Steve was excited too. He didn't know much about electronics, but he saw the potential. Wozniak spent weeks designing and building the blue box. It was a complicated device, but he finally finished it. He showed it to Steve, and they tested it out. It worked. They could make free phone calls all over the world. They even tried calling the Vatican. They pretended to be important people, like Henry Kissinger. It was just a prank, but it was fun. But Steve had a different idea. He thought, why just use this for fun? We could sell these blue boxes. Wozniak was surprised. He just wanted to share his creation with others. He wasn't interested in making money. But Steve convinced him. He said they could start a business. So, they started making and selling blue boxes. Wozniak built them, and Steve found customers. They sold them for $150 each. It was a good business. They made a lot of money, but it was also illegal. One day, they had a scary experience. They were trying to sell a blue box to some guys at a pizza place. The guys pulled out a gun and stole the blue box. Steve and Wozniak were scared, and they decided to stop selling them. Even though the blue box business was short, it was important. It taught Steve and Wozniak how to work together. They learned that Wozniak was good at building things, and Steve was good at selling them. It also gave them the confidence to start something bigger. Wozniak was still working at Hewlett-Packard HP, a big company that made electronics. He was designing computers in his free time. He showed his designs to HP, but they weren't interested. They thought it was just a hobby. Wozniak was disappointed, but Steve saw an opportunity. He knew that Wozniak's computer designs were amazing. He said, let's start our own company and build these computers. Wozniak was hesitant. He liked his job at HP. It was safe and secure. But Steve was persuasive. He said, we'll have fun, and we can change the world. Steve convinced Wozniak to leave HP and start a new company with him. They needed a name for their company. Steve had been working at an apple farm, and he liked the name Apple. It sounded simple and friendly. He said if they didn't have a better name by the next day, they would call it Apple. They didn't think of anything better, so they called it Apple Computer. They also needed some money to start the company. Wozniak sold his calculator, and Steve sold his Volkswagen van. They raised about $1,300. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. And so, in 1976, Apple Computer was born. It was a partnership between two friends, Steve Jobs, the visionary salesman, and Steve Wozniak, the brilliant engineer. They were an unlikely pair, but together they would change the world of computing. Their first product was the Apple I, a simple circuit board that allowed people to build their own computers. It was a small start, but it was the beginning of something big. It was the beginning of Apple. Chapter 3. The Apple II. A New Age Begins. After the first few Apple I computers were built and sold, Steve Jobs knew they could do even better. The Apple I was good for hobbyists, people who loved electronics and building things themselves. But Steve wanted to reach everyone. He wanted to make a computer that was easy to use, right out of the box. This meant creating something totally new. The Apple II. The Apple II was different from other computers at the time. It wasn't just a bunch of wires and parts. It had a case, a keyboard, and it could show color graphics on a television screen. This made it much more appealing to people who weren't tech experts. It looked friendly, not intimidating. The Apple II was the start of a new age, the age of the personal computer. Steve Jobs worked with his friend Steve Wozniak to design the Apple II. Wozniak was the genius when it came to electronics. He was very good at making circuits and writing software. Jobs was the one who focused on how the computer looked and how easy it was to use. One of the most important things about the Apple II was its color graphics. Before this, most computers could only show black and white text. Wozniak found a clever way to use the computer's chips to create color images on a regular television screen. This made the Apple II much more fun and exciting to use. Another important thing was the Apple II's design. Jobs wanted it to look good in people's homes. He wanted it to be something that people would be proud to own. The Apple II had a plastic case that was clean and simple. It didn't look like a complicated machine. It looked like something that anyone could use. The Apple II wasn't just a better computer. It was also easier to sell. Jobs knew that to reach more people, they needed to sell the Apple II in stores. He found a store owner named Paul Terrell who agreed to buy 50 Apple II computers, but he wanted them to be fully assembled, not just parts. This was a big challenge, but Jobs and Wozniak found a way to do it. The Apple II was a success. People were excited about having a computer in their homes. They used it for games, for writing, and for learning. Apple grew very quickly. Jobs and Wozniak became rich and famous. As Apple grew, Jobs realized he needed more help. He brought in Mike Markula, an older and more experienced businessman, to help him manage the company. Markula invested in Apple and became the chairman of the board. He helped Jobs to focus on the most important things and to make smart decisions. Another important person was Rod Holt. He helped Jobs to design the power supply for the Apple II. Holt was a very different kind of person than Jobs. He was a Marxist and smoked a lot of cigarettes. But he was also a very good engineer, and Jobs knew that he could help Apple make a better product. The Apple II was a success because it was a good product and because it was easy to use. But it was also a success because Steve Jobs had a vision. He believed that computers could change the world. He wanted to make computers that were for everyone, not just for experts. The Apple II helped to start a new age, the age of the personal computer. It showed that computers could be more than just tools for businesses. They could be tools for creativity, for learning, and for communication. The Apple II made it possible for ordinary people to have access to the power of computers. It helped to change the way people lived and worked. The Apple II was a very important step in Steve Jobs' journey. It showed that he had the talent and the vision to build a great company. It also showed that he was willing to take risks and to do things differently. The Apple II was just the beginning. There were many more challenges and successes to come. But the Apple II was the foundation on which Steve Jobs built his empire. It was the first big step in his quest to leave a dent in the universe. Chapter 4: The Macintosh. Insanely great. After the success of the Apple II, Steve Jobs had a new idea. He wanted to make a computer that was easy for everyone to use, not just for people who knew a lot about technology. He imagined a computer that was like a friendly appliance, something simple and beautiful. He wanted to make a computer that was insanely great. To make this happen, Jobs started a new project called the Macintosh. He knew that the future of computers was not just about numbers and text. It was about pictures and icons, things that everyone could understand. He wanted to create a computer that was fun and easy to use, a computer that would change the world. Jobs had seen something special at a place called Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC was a research center where scientists were working on new computer ideas. They had created a graphical user interface, or GUI. This meant that instead of typing commands, you could use a mouse to click on pictures and menus. It was much easier to learn and use. Jobs was very excited by this idea. He gathered a team of talented people to work on the Macintosh. He wanted the best engineers, designers, and programmers to join him. He knew that to make something truly special, he needed a team that was as passionate and creative as he was. He found people who were willing to work hard, think differently, and push the limits of what was possible. However, Jobs could be very demanding. He had a strong vision, and he expected everyone to share it. He could be critical, even harsh, if he didn't think someone was doing their best. People on the Macintosh team called it his reality distortion field. This meant that Jobs had a way of convincing people that anything was possible, even if it seemed impossible. One member of the team, Andy Hertzfeld, explained it this way: in his presence, reality is changeable. He can convince anyone of practically anything. It wears off when he's not around, but it makes it hard to have realistic schedules. Jobs' reality distortion field could be difficult to deal with. He could be stubborn and unwilling to listen to others. But it also helped him to inspire his team to do amazing things. He pushed them to create a computer that was not just functional, but also beautiful and easy to use. The Macintosh team worked tirelessly, often working long hours and weekends. Jobs was constantly pushing them to make it better, to make it perfect. He wanted every detail to be just right, from the design of the case to the way the mouse felt in your hand. He wanted the Macintosh to be more than just a computer. He wanted it to be a work of art. Finally, in 1984, the Macintosh was ready. Apple planned a big event to introduce the new computer to the world. They created a television commercial that was very different from anything that had been seen before. It was called 1984, and it showed a woman running towards a big screen with a hammer. The screen showed a man talking, and the woman threw the hammer at the screen, breaking it. The commercial was a message that the Macintosh was going to break the rules and change the way people thought about computers. The launch of the Macintosh was a success. People were excited about the new computer and its easy-to-use interface. The Macintosh was not just a machine. It was a tool for creativity and expression. It inspired people to think differently and to see the world in a new way. The Macintosh was a big achievement for Steve Jobs. He had taken a risk, pushed his team to the limit, and created something truly remarkable. He had shown the world that computers could be more than just tools for business. They could be tools for everyone. He had made a computer that was insanely great. However, the success of the Macintosh did not solve all of Jobs' problems. His demanding personality and his desire for control would soon lead to conflicts with others at Apple, and before long, he would find himself facing a new challenge: getting fired from the company he had created. Chapter 5. Fired from Apple. The year was 1984, and Apple was on top of the world. The Macintosh computer was new and exciting, and Steve Jobs was a star. But inside Apple, things were not so good. There was a big problem brewing between Steve Jobs and John Sculley. Remember John Sculley? He was the president of Pepsi that Steve Jobs had convinced to come to Apple as CEO. Jobs had asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to change the world?" Sculley chose to change the world. But now he and Jobs saw the world very differently. Sculley was a businessman. He focused on making money and running the company smoothly. Jobs was an artist. He cared most about making great products, even if it meant spending more money or taking risks. The two men started to disagree more and more. One of the biggest problems was the Macintosh. Jobs was very proud of the Mac, but it wasn't selling as well as expected. It was too expensive and not powerful enough for many people. Some of the engineers at Apple wanted to make a better Mac with more memory and a faster processor. But Jobs wasn't interested. He was already thinking about the next big thing. He was also difficult to work with. He could be very charming and persuasive, but he could also be mean and critical. He had a special way of looking at people that made them feel uncomfortable. He would tell people their ideas were shit or that they were bozos. He created a lot of stress and tension at Apple. Mike Markkula, one of the original investors in Apple, had brought Sculley in to manage Jobs. Markkula thought Jobs was too young and inexperienced to run the company. He hoped Sculley could keep Jobs under control. But Sculley found it hard to control Jobs. Jobs was very stubborn and didn't like being told what to do. The situation became worse in 1985. Apple's sales were down, and the company was losing money. Sculley decided that something had to be done. He talked to the board of directors, and they agreed that Jobs had to be removed from his position as head of the Macintosh division. The news was a shock to Jobs. He had created Apple, and now he was being fired from his own company. He felt betrayed and angry. He couldn't believe that Sculley, the man he had brought to Apple, was now turning against him. Sculley told Jobs that he could still be involved in the company, but in a different role. He wanted Jobs to focus on new product development, to come up with the next big idea. But Jobs didn't want to be a product visionary. He wanted to be in charge. The two men argued for weeks. Finally, Sculley went to the board of directors and told them that he could no longer work with Jobs. He said that Jobs was undermining him and making it impossible for him to run the company. The board had to make a choice: side with Sculley, the CEO, or side with Jobs, the founder. They chose Sculley. In May 1985, Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple. It was a painful and humiliating experience. He had lost his job, his company, and his sense of identity. He was only 30 years old, and his career seemed to be over. He felt like Icarus, the boy from Greek mythology who flew too close to the sun and fell. He later said that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. It freed him to start anew, to explore new ideas, and to learn from his mistakes. He realized that he had been too focused on control and not enough on collaboration. He also learned the importance of humility and empathy. But at the time, it was hard to see the silver lining. Jobs was lost and uncertain. He didn't know what he would do next. The end of an era had come, but a new chapter in the story was about to begin. He would have to be strong and find a way to rise from the ashes. Chapter 6. Next. A new beginning. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs felt lost. He had been the heart and soul of the company, but now he was on his own. He was sad and angry, but also ready for a new challenge. He decided to start a new company called NXT. Next was different from Apple. Instead of making computers for everyone, Jobs wanted to make high-end computers for universities and researchers. He wanted to create machines that were powerful and beautiful, with the best technology available. One thing that was very important to Jobs was design. He wanted the next computer to be perfect, inside and out. He spent a lot of time choosing the right materials and making sure every detail was just right. The NXT computer was a black cube, simple and elegant. Jobs wanted it to be a work of art, not just a machine. At Next, the goal was to make a computer that was more powerful and easier to use than anything else on the market. This meant using new technologies and creating innovative software. Jobs also wanted to build a special factory for Next. It was a very modern factory with robots and automation. Jobs wanted to show that American companies could still make great products, even though many factories were moving overseas. But building the factory and designing the computer took a lot of time and money. Next was a small company, and it was difficult to compete with bigger companies like IBM and Apple. The Next computer was very expensive, costing much more than other computers. It was hard to sell them because many people didn't understand why they were so special. Jobs had a vision, but it was hard to convince others to see it. The NXT computer was beautiful and powerful, but it was not a big success. They were too expensive, and not enough people wanted them. Jobs had made a mistake in his first attempt to lead Apple, and was now making the same mistake again. Even though the NXT computer didn't sell well, the software it used was very important. Next step, the operating system, was advanced and easy to use. It had features that were later used in Apple's Mac OS X. One of the best things about Next Step was that it was object-oriented. This meant that programmers could write code that was reusable and easy to change. It made it easier to create complex software. The Next STT-EPI operating system was a key part of the NXT computer, and it became a valuable asset for Apple when they later bought NXT. Although NXT didn't become a big success, Steve Jobs learned a lot from the experience. He learned about the importance of design, but also about the importance of making products that people could afford. He also learned how to lead a team and how to work with other companies. He realized that he couldn't do everything himself and that he needed to rely on the skills and expertise of others. The next years were difficult for Jobs, but they were also important. He grew as a leader and learned valuable lessons that would help him later in his career. He had been fired from his own company, but he was not defeated. He was ready to come back stronger than ever. The next chapter in his life would be even more amazing. Chapter 7. Chrisanne and Lisa, a difficult family. After helping Apple become a big company, Steve Jobs' life changed a lot. He had money and fame, but his personal life was still complicated. One part of this was his relationship with Chrisanne Brennan, a woman he had known since high school. They had a history together, and it wasn't always easy. Remember Chrisanne? She and Steve had lived in a cabin together a few years before. They were young and free, but things didn't last. Even after that, they stayed in each other's lives, sometimes close, sometimes not. They had a special connection, but also a lot of problems. Now, in 1977, Chrisanne was pregnant. The baby's father was Steve. This was a surprise for both of them. They weren't really together at the time, but Chris Ann decided to have the baby. Steve wasn't sure he wanted to be a father. He was busy with Apple and his career. He also said he wasn't sure if the baby was his. It was a difficult time for Chrisen. After the baby was born, Steve didn't want to be very involved. He didn't want to think about it. He even said that he wasn't the father, even though he knew he was. This made Chris Ann very angry. She felt like he was abandoning her and their child. The baby was a girl, and they named her Lisa. Lisa Brennan. Steve didn't give her his last name, Jobs. Chrisen had to raise Lisa on her own. She didn't have much money. She even had to go on welfare to get help. It was hard for her, but she loved Lisa very much. Years later, Steve would say he wasn't proud of how he acted during this time. He said he was young and didn't know how to be a father. He also said he felt like Chris Ann wasn't telling him the truth about who else she was seeing. But whatever the reasons, he wasn't there for Lisa. The county of San Mateo, where they lived, decided to take Steve to court. They wanted him to pay child support, money to help Chrisen raise Lisa. Steve fought it at first. He didn't want to admit that Lisa was his daughter. He even said bad things about Chris Ann to try to make her look bad in court. But then, something important happened. Apple was getting ready to become a public company. This meant they would sell shares of the company to regular people. It was a big deal. Steve knew that if he was fighting a court case about his child, it could make Apple look bad. So he agreed to take a test to see if he was Lisa's father. The test showed that he was almost certainly the father. He had to admit it. The court ordered him to pay child support and to pay back the money Chris Ann had received from welfare. He also agreed to give Lisa his last name, Brennan Jobs. Even after all of this, Steve still didn't spend much time with Lisa. He was very focused on his work. He didn't seem to know how to be a father. Chris Ann said that Steve was full of broken glass because he had been given up for adoption himself. She said that made it hard for him to connect with other people, even his own daughter. But Lisa was a strong and smart girl. She did well in school. She was good at writing. She also had a lot of anger and sadness because her father wasn't there for her. It was a difficult start to her life. This whole situation shows a different side of Steve Jobs. He was a genius, but he was also a person with problems. He made mistakes. He hurt people, but he also learned from his mistakes, even if it took him a long time. The story of Lisa and Chris Ann is a reminder that even the most successful people have complicated lives and make choices they later regret. It also shows that even when things are difficult, it's possible to find a way forward, to build a relationship, and to create a better future. He who is abandoned is an abandoner, said the mother of that child. And the key problem was the theme of abandonment in Steve's life. Chapter 8. Return to the Apple Tree. In the 1990s, things were not good for Apple. The company that Steve Jobs had started was losing money. Other companies, like Microsoft, were becoming more popular. Many people thought Apple was going to disappear. It was a difficult time for everyone who worked there. Gil Amelio was the CEO of Apple then. He was trying to fix the problems, but it was hard. He knew that Apple needed something new, something big, to change things. He thought about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs wasn't working at Apple anymore. He had started his own company called Next. He was also working at Pixar, making movies like Toy Story. Some people at Apple thought that maybe Steve Jobs could help. They knew he was smart and creative, and he understood Apple better than anyone. But there was a problem. Steve Jobs and Gil Amelio didn't like each other very much. They had met before, and it didn't go well. Amelio thought Jobs was too difficult to work with. He was worried that Jobs would try to take over the company. Still, Apple needed help. Amelio decided to call Jobs. He wanted to see if there was a way for them to work together. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew that Apple needed something special to survive. In December 1996, Steve Jobs came back to Apple. He didn't become the CEO right away. He was just an advisor. But everyone knew that he was really in charge. He started to make changes quickly. One of the first things he did was to look at all of Apple's products. There were too many, he thought. Apple was making too many different kinds of computers, and it was confusing for people. Jobs decided to stop making some of them. He wanted to focus on the best products, the ones that were really important. This was a difficult decision, and it made some people at Apple angry. But Jobs knew it was the right thing to do. He also started to work on a new operating system. The operating system is the software that makes a computer work. Apple's operating system was old and not very good. Jobs wanted to make a new one that was better than anything else. He knew that Next had a good operating system, so he decided to use that. Apple bought NXT, and Jobs brought his team from NXT to work on the new operating system. It was a big change for Apple. Jobs was making the company smaller and more focused. He was also bringing in new people and new ideas. Some people were excited about the changes. They thought that Jobs could save Apple. But other people were worried. They didn't like Jobs' personality, and they didn't want him to take over the company. One person who was worried was Gil Amelio. He was still the CEO, but he knew that Jobs was becoming more powerful. He was afraid that Jobs would try to take his job. Amelio tried to work with Jobs, but it was difficult. Jobs was very demanding and had a strong vision for Apple. Amelio didn't always agree with him. Things were getting tense at Apple. There was a power struggle between Jobs and Amelio. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. The future of Apple was uncertain. This was a difficult time for Apple. The company was struggling, and there was a lot of conflict. But Steve Jobs was back, and he had a plan. He was determined to save Apple, even if it meant making some tough decisions. The next few months would be a turning point for Apple and for Steve Jobs himself. The stage was set for his second act. Chapter 9: The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and more. After fixing Apple's problems, Steve Jobs was ready to create new products. He wanted to make Apple more than just a computer company. He saw a future where computers, music players, phones, and tablets all work together perfectly. This chapter is about how Steve Jobs and Apple changed the world again, one product at a time. The first big change was the iMac. Jobs knew that people needed a computer for their homes, but most computers were boring and difficult to use. He wanted to make something different. The iMac was a colorful, all-in-one computer. This meant that the screen, keyboard, and computer were all in one piece. It was easy to set up and use, even if you didn't know a lot about computers. The iMac was a big success. It showed that Apple could still make great products that people loved. But Jobs didn't stop there. He wanted to do more. He started thinking about music. At the time, people were listening to music on CDs or downloading songs online. But there wasn't a good way to organize and listen to all your music on a computer. Jobs wanted to create a better way. That's why Apple made iTunes. iTunes was a program that made it easy to copy music from CDs to your computer, create playlists, and listen to your favorite songs. But Jobs didn't want people to just listen to music on their computers. He wanted them to be able to take their music with them. So, Apple created the iPod. The iPod was a small, portable music player that could hold thousands of songs. It was easy to use, had a long battery life, and looked beautiful. It was a big hit. People loved being able to carry all their favorite music in their pocket. The iPod changed the music industry. Before the iPod, most people bought music on CDs. But the iPod made it easy to download songs online. Apple created the iTunes Music Store, where people could buy songs legally for 99 cents each. It was a simple and easy way to get music, and it helped to stop people from downloading music illegally. The iTunes Music Store became very popular, and Apple became a major player in the music industry. Jobs saw that the iPod and iTunes were changing the way people listened to music. He wanted to do the same for other areas of people's lives. He started thinking about phones. Most phones at the time were difficult to use and didn't do much more than make calls. Jobs wanted to create a phone that was easy to use, had a great screen, and could do many different things. The result was the iPhone. The iPhone was a smartphone that combined a phone, a music player, and an internet device. It had a big touchscreen that was easy to use, and it could do many things, like browse the web, send emails, and watch videos. The iPhone was a revolutionary product. It changed the way people used phones. It also created a new industry, mobile apps. Apple created the App Store, where people could download small programs that did all sorts of things, from playing games to editing photos to reading books. The App Store became very popular, and it helped to make the iPhone even more useful. Jobs didn't stop with the iPhone. He wanted to create a tablet computer that was easy to use and could do many of the things that people did on their computers. The result was the iPad. The iPad was a tablet computer that had a big touchscreen, a long battery life, and access to thousands of apps. The iPad was a new kind of device. It wasn't a computer, and it wasn't a phone. It was something in between. It was perfect for reading books, watching movies, browsing the web, and playing games. The iPad was another big hit for Apple. Jobs saw that the world was changing. People were using more and more mobile devices like phones and tablets. He believed that the future was in the cloud. The cloud is a network of computers that store your information and make it available to you anywhere. Jobs wanted to create a service that would make it easy for people to store their music, photos, videos, and documents in the cloud and access them on any device. That's why Apple created iCloud. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad were all big successes for Apple. They changed the way people use technology and helped to make Apple one of the most valuable companies in the world. But these products also showed something important about Steve Jobs. He was a visionary who always looked to the future. He wasn't afraid to take risks, and he always wanted to make things better. Steve Jobs didn't just make computers, music players, phones, and tablets. He created tools that allowed people to be creative, to express themselves, and to connect with others. He changed the world, and he did it by always thinking different. He was a visionary who left a lasting legacy. Chapter 10. What made him so successful? Steve Jobs was a special man. He made amazing products that changed how we use computers, listen to music, and communicate. But what was his secret? What made him so good at what he did? It wasn't just one thing, but many things working together. First, Steve Jobs had a clear vision. He knew what he wanted to create. He didn't just want to make a better computer. He wanted to make a computer that was beautiful, easy to use, and powerful. He wanted to make something that people loved, not just something they needed. This vision guided everything he did. He also had a strong focus. He knew what was important and what wasn't. He could say no to many good ideas, so he could focus on the few that were truly great. This helped him avoid getting distracted and keep Apple on track. Jobs was a perfectionist. He cared about every detail, even the ones that most people wouldn't notice. He wanted everything to be just right, from the design of the product to the way it was packaged. This attention to detail made Apple products special and different. In the little things, Jobs wanted perfection. Steve Jobs was also a great storyteller. He knew how to present his products in a way that made people excited. He could create a feeling of magic and wonder around even the simplest things. This made people want to buy Apple products, even if they were more expensive than other options. He could make people desire and want to buy his products. Another important thing was that Jobs combined art and technology. He knew that the best products were not just functional, but also beautiful. He brought together designers and engineers to create products that were both powerful and pleasing to the eye. Apple also had a great team. He was good at finding talented people and inspiring them to do their best work. He created a culture where people were encouraged to be creative and innovative. It was a team made up of players, and he made sure to get rid of the rest. Finally, Steve Jobs was not afraid to be different. He challenged the status quo and did things his own way. He didn't care what other companies were doing. He wanted to create something unique and special. This willingness to be different helped Apple stand out from the crowd. It wasn't just that Jobs had a vision or that he was a perfectionist. It was that he had a clear vision, a strong focus, a perfectionist's eye, and an amazing ability to present his ideas. He combined art and technology and built a great team. He was not afraid to be different. All of these things together made Steve Jobs the most successful business leader of his time. He made products that changed the world. and he built a company that will be remembered for generations. The legacy of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs died in 2011, but his story doesn't end there. He left behind a world that is very different because of him. He was more than just a businessman. He was a dreamer, an artist, and a leader who pushed people to do their best. Think about the phone in your pocket. It probably does many things that Steve Jobs imagined. He believed that technology could be beautiful and easy for everyone to use. He showed us that computers could be more than just tools. They could be works of art. He also showed us the importance of building a company that lasts. He wanted Apple to be more than just a way to make money. He wanted it to be a place where people were inspired to create amazing things for years to come. Steve Jobs wasn't perfect. He could be difficult, demanding, and even unkind. But he was also passionate, creative, and determined. He taught us that it's okay to be different, to think outside the box, and to challenge the rules. He proved that one person, with a strong vision and a lot of hard work, can truly change the world. His legacy lives on in the products we use every day, and in the way we think about technology. He showed us that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Steve Jobs was a man who dared to dream, and he inspired us to do the same.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.